compare and contrast making video games back in 80s and 90s versus making modern video games these years. So Universe is a game from Commodore Amiga, released in 1994. I was the sole programmer on that machine. And Mercenary is a game released last year on PlayStation Vita, and I was the lead engine programmer on that with a much larger team than what we had back in the day. So yeah, it's just compare the industry, compare how we develop things, just how things have changed basically. So I'll just give you a little bit of background about myself, because obviously most of you don't know me. I started programming, well, officially working as a programmer back at Alligator Software in Sheffield in 1987. It's quite a while back. Some of you may not have even been born then. These are all the different companies I've worked at over the years, broadly in chronological order from top left down to bottom right. So we used to be Sony Cambridge, but we are now part of Guerrilla Games, who is still owned by Sony. Okay, so these are a few games I wrote long time ago. Most of these were on Amiga and ST at the time. A lot of them are budget games. I started on the C64, moved on to Amiga, as I say, did quite a few of these. And then after Amiga and ST, it moved on to all of these various games as well, and all of these various different platforms, which is quite a few. So I've gone from C64, very not very much power in that, 1 megahertz 8-bit chip, all the way up to PlayStation 4, which is what I'm working on at the moment at Sony. Currently supporting Shadowfall. We're doing downloadable content for that, post-release. And we've got an internal new game that we're prototyping at the moment. Okay. So where I started, 12, 13 I think, when I first started learning to program. My mum said she'd buy me one if I managed to pay for half of the C64, which back in 1982 or 3 was about 240 quid. So I saved up for a year with 2 paper rounds to put half the money towards that, which is...
They must have been big paper rounds.
They weren't. They're a bloody nightmare. Sorry. And I started by typing in listings, basic listings from magazines and all that sort of stuff, which there's a limited amount that you could do from those. And C64 Basic, unfortunately, wasn't that great. So I then moved on. This is what I call my first dev kit. It's not a dev kit at all, but this is as close as I got to it. Because buying, professional software to program on, well, I was a 12, 13-year-old child. I couldn't afford that. So what I did is I got an action replay cartridge, which what it allowed me to do was literally type numbers in here, which is machine code. It's as close as you can get to what the actual machine does. And with the action replay cartridge, you can then disassemble this into a language called assembler, which is what they are. They're mnemonics. So they're what the chip is doing. LDA is loading into a register from that memory address. LDX, it's a different type of register. Well, that's basically it, typing in numbers, disassembling them, working out where I type the numbers wrong, type over the numbers, iterate, and so on. But what it did allow me to do was make my own demos, try and make my own games, slowly, because it was it was time-consuming and going around in circles quite a bit. These are modern dev kits. Very different ballpark these days. So we've got a PlayStation 4 dev kit here, and this is actually a Vita dev kit, which is tiny. The original Vita dev kits that we got were probably about the size of this. 2 circuit boards in a glass shield, where we had to take the top off and literally solder a fan on. There was 3 of those in Europe, and our studio managed to get 1 of them. So that was pretty good for us. It's unfortunately a little bit difficult to see at the minute because of the sun. But over on this side, that's a PlayStation 2 dev kit. That's a monster compared with these more modern kits. And again, the Amiga and Vita kit there for size comparison. PlayStation 3 dev kits were broadly the same sort of size as a PS2 dev kit. And the cost of these things is quite a bit. I mean, I think PS2 dev kits when they came out were broadly about $20,000 each. PS3 dev kits, £20,000 each. You know, and it's a lot of money. You think, well, why are they so expensive? And the reason they were so expensive in the past is they've almost had to be handmade. You know, factories making PS2s and PS3s are not geared up for making dev kits. The dev kits themselves are not PS2s and PS3s. They are those components, but they've got double the RAM. They've got other circuitry inside, like performance analysis. They've got additional communication ports in them for development. There's a whole bunch of things, which is why that thing is huge, that's inside there. And there's no mass production manufacturing pipeline to actually make those. So they were expensive. Unfortunately, they're coming down now. I don't know how much PS4 dev kits are, but Vita kits, I think, are around about £1,500 plus VAT, which significant difference from paying 20 grand or 30 grand, sorry, $20,000 for a PS2, PS3 kit. If you go back in the day when I was doing Amiga stuff, I started at Alligator, but fortunately Alligator went bankrupt shortly after, about 9 months after I started. I spent three and a half years at High Tech Software. They're a budget company, or doing budget games, should I say. And dev kits, at that time, there's one called PDS, Professional Development System. They were £1,500, which broadly equates to about £3,000 if you add inflation, bringing them up to modern day costs. We couldn't afford that, so we made our own dev kits. We wired 2 Amigas together with parallel ports. I wrote assemblers, I wrote editors, I wrote debuggers, machine code monitors. My friends who I was working with, they worked on Spectrum, Amstrad, MSX. So we wired the Amiga and ST up via serial port to those kits. And then I wrote the assemblers for the other chipsets for C64 and Z80 and everything else. So we saved ourselves a huge amount of money, which is probably not what you could really do these days, trying to interface with the new...
How long did it take you to do all that, although you saved the money? What sort of time?
A couple of months, maybe. It's hard to say. It was an iterative development. I think I did a 6502 compiler assembler for C64 first, and that was, I don't know, a week, maybe. And then we moved on to 68000 for the Amiga and ST, and then went back and did the Z80 for the Spectrum Amstrad. And I think MSX was Z80 as well, so we wired that up. And then we modified that for Game Boy, which we used to call Z40. It's a Z80 with a lot of the instructions removed. But it saved us a huge amount of money. And yeah, we iterated, we improved on it.
There's an awful lot of systems from back then used the Z80.
Yeah.
It was all over the place.
Yeah. So that gives you a little bit of an idea of, you know, the modern day development versus, you know, back in the day. And just having a look back at the actual Amiga itself. So from a hardware perspective, I mean, it was obviously very cutting edge at the time it came out. And a big part of that was the chipset that's in there, the custom chipsets, which they named. You got your Agnes, which is your graphics chipset. It's got a thing called a Blitter on it. It's got a thing called a Copper on it, which is co-processor, which sort of talks to the video chip with Denise, which deals with the various graphics modes. It's also got hardware scrolling and hardware sprites, which is a significant thing for the Amiga. Another chip called Paula, which was the audio chip. The hardware sprites and hardware scrolling were what gave the Amiga the advantage over the Atari ST. Even though the ST ran slightly quicker, 8 megahertz versus 7.14, something like that. But without hardware scrolling or the sprites, the ST just couldn't compete on numerous games. And it's bizarre, actually, because the guy who designed the Amiga, Jay Miner, he also designed the Atari 2600. He actually invented the hardware sprite. And Atari brought out this machine without hardware sprites, strangely enough, versus the Amiga. But they were going for different markets at that time, much more business orientated. And then the Amiga became the games machine to some degree, and Atari continued trying to push more for business side of things. There's also actually a lot of interesting stuff about how Atari tried to stop Amiga, bringing out the Amiga, copyrights and patents and all that sort of stuff, because Jay Miner and everything else. If you look it up on Wikipedia, it's quite interesting. Sort of like it's a little bit of a battle for supremacy at the time. And although Atari did get the lead initially, the Amiga caught up afterwards. Now, if you look at the PS Vita, in comparison, it's actually what I call much more off-the-shelf components than what you had on the Amiga. There's an ARM chipset in there as the main CPU. I can't remember which graphics chipset it is in there, but it's broadly PowerVR based. And there's a whole bunch of other components in there, which Sony haven't designed themselves. They've taken components from various different manufacturers and put these things together, which is quite different to how they used to work. I mean, PlayStation 1, PlayStation 2, PS3, very, very custom chipsets in there. You know, spent billions of dollars on the PS3 designing that. And it's incredibly fast for what it is. It's an incredibly powerful machine, but it did actually cost them a hell of a lot of money. So with the Vita, it's more off the shelf. However, it's not just a bunch of chips cobbled together. What Sony do is they take components, but they will modify them. They'll make changes to the silicon to make them better for games. And more importantly, it's how all these things actually interconnect, pushing data through, making the pipelines as fast as possible. Also about the power ratios as well. I mean, in this thing, you've got 4 CPUs, you've got 4 graphics chips, you've got 2 touch screens, you've got gyroscopes, you've got a compass, you've got 2 cameras, Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, all running off a battery, which, to be honest, is pretty incredible for what it actually does. And the Vita, if you were to compare it against something like your modern iPads and some of your modern tablets, it's not as fast, it's not as powerful. But actually, it'll blow a lot of those machines out of the water with games. I mean, you look at Mercenary and then find your best iPad game, you won't find anything that's as good as it. And a lot of that is not just the hardware, it's also down to how Sony engineer the operating system, and we write our own device drivers and everything else. And that is what allows us to get the power and push these machines as hard as we actually do. Okay. So another comparison between back in the day, Amigas, and modern day games here. This is the Mercenary team. This is a barbecue mastering party. Not everyone that worked on the game is there, but the majority of people are. I mean, we actually started quite small. This game Mercenary took 3.5 years from the initial design and inception to actually shipping. And we ramped up. We were small to start with, but by the time we finished, we peaked at about 120 people, which is a lot, but you compare it with some other games these days. And I still consider us to be a relatively small team for what we were doing. Now going back to Universe, which was about 16 to 18 months to write that on Amiga. It's by far the biggest game I'd ever done. I mean, the games I'd done before that were horizontal scrollers, vertical shoot-em-ups, all that sort of stuff. One programmer, one artist. That was it. But for Amiga, it was the biggest team I'd worked on. Universe, biggest team I worked on, 4 people. And a musician and an audio engineer as a part-time engineer. So there's myself, I did all the programming, wrote all the tools. There's Rolf Moore, who is an exceptional artist. He did all the artwork, all the backgrounds, and a lot of design. We had Jim Bott Mason, who was an artist and co-designer, and then we had Stu Atkinson, who was an artist and animator. So that was it, four dedicated people for Universe versus 120 people peak on Mercenary. So what else? Yeah, so like I say, on Universe, we've got people doing multiple jobs there. We've got artists doing designer roles, and there were script writers as well, doing stories, storyboards and everything else. So with 120 people on Mercenary, it's just complete different ballgame. I mean, even if you take something like artists, there's a huge variation in the field. We have specialists for doing environment art. We have people that do purely modeling of characters or weapons. We have people that paint previs backgrounds, all that sort of stuff. We have people dedicated to UI and you know, all the 2D side of artwork. We have people that are just doing lighting in a similar way to the movie industry, just lighting our levels. And also we have what we call tech art. And tech art are doing things like rigging models, or they're doing shaders, or they're doing stuff that is closer to what a programmer would potentially do. And they sit in that middle ground between artist and programmer. And that carries across all of the disciplines. So same with the programmers, we've got specialists for rendering, specialists for AI and physics and everything else. And it's just something that we didn't have back in the day. As I say, I was the one programmer. I did everything on Universe. There's no way I could do everything on Mercenary. I might eventually be able to learn all of those jobs, but I certainly wouldn't be as good as, say, our specialist rendering guys. And it's not just about the team sizes, it's the supporting structures to go with the team sizes. So again, back on Universe, we all had Amigas. I had two. Stu had an A4000 because he was animating stuff and that was helping him. And Rolf had a PC and a scanner. And that was it, really. And PCs weren't really that commonplace back then. I mean, we started in probably 92, middle of 92 and published in 94. Whereas for in our Sony studio for Mercenary, everyone's got a PC, a powerful PC. Everyone's got a massive hard drive. I think we had 2 terabyte drives just for the work files on Mercenary. Plus you got other drives just for your apps and Windows and everything else. We've all got Vita dev kits, pretty much every single person who's developing the game. Network coders have got 2 kits, or possibly more, depending on what they're doing, or borrowing off other people. And it's not just what each individual has. We've got over 40 what we call build servers. These are like this rack here. They're just loads of PCs running in a room in the back of our office. And these are to support the team. So we've got 15 light mapping machines. And what these do is, these will do a light bake. And it's an overnight process. It's like 8 to 10 hours long. And it will ray trace the lighting into levels and create shadow maps and everything else there. So it's obviously quite a big job. We have other machines which are what we call waypoint builders. They analyze where the non-player characters, the AI characters can go, and they work out lines of sight and they build data into the waypoints so that the AI can navigate around our levels. We've also got what we call content builders. So every time we grab new data, the data comes out of something like Maya or Photoshop or whatever, and it has to be converted into data that is correct for the console, and this can take quite a long time. So we have all these machines churning through data in the background so that we don't have to actually do it on our machines. And then there are the test machines. So when I check my code in, test machines will grab it, they'll compile it, they'll make sure it works across all the different builds, they'll run thousands of unit tests over it, and if it breaks, they will mail me and tell me to fix it. Or they will mail anyone else that broke it. Which is a lot, but if you think about it, when you've got 120 people working on a game, and if I check something in that breaks the game, and then other people grab it. You've got downtime of like 10 or 20 people for a couple of hours. That soon starts adding up, and that's why we need this sort of stuff to be running.
So you talked about sort of team sizes, working in different team sizes, from very small to massive, and the difference in the actual kit using. But you spent about 4 years at High Tech Software doing budget games. Can you tell us a bit about, not necessarily the kit, but the actual mindset of you and whoever was working with you, putting out a budget title? How do you go about doing a budget title?
Yeah, a lot of that was the games we played. We saw a game we played and we went, I want to make one of them. So we did a lot of shoot 'em ups. We did one called Alien World, which we did after playing R-Type. There are a few similarities.
But you don't go in there thinking, there's a little bug there, it's on the budget, we'll maybe leave it.
No, we pushed them as much as we could, but our timelines were short. It literally was. There was myself and Richard Morton, who his nickname was Rambo. And we just made the games that we enjoyed. But it was literally 3 to 6 months for each game. I think the longest game we did was Scooby and Scrappy-Doo, which was 6 months, platformer. The shortest game I did there was 2 weeks, which wasn't by design. It had been contracted out to someone else, and they basically made a mess of it and they couldn't finish it. They sent the source code to us. I looked through it. It was appalling. They had variable names like Hamster, which was the main character, but it was a helicopter. They called the bullets something else random, like Bunny or something. It was just, and it was a joke. And
Is it easier to start again?
We did. Bend it.
Okay.
Scrapped it, started again. They'd already got space in the magazines for advertisement and stuff like that. The game needed to come out fast. So it was cranked out with very little sleep in 2 weeks. So it was we did what we liked, basically. Occasionally the boss would come and go, I want such and such type game. But a lot of it was down to us until later on at High Tech, when they got involved with Hanna-Barbera, and we did a lot of their character-based games. So there's Yogi Bear and Scooby-Doo, and they did a few of those later on. And then it was trying to shape a game using these characters. But most games were shoot 'em ups or platformers or that sort of stuff, and that tend to be what the games ended up being.
You did another game as well without much sleep and no time off. Was it Wayne Gretzky that took 4.5 months solid?
Yeah, you've been reading, have you? Yeah, that was up at Software Creations. Again, we came from my friend's company, which is great. Aliens from Outer Space. Unfortunately, that company went bankrupt, as did this one, that one. I'd left some of these companies before they went bankrupt. Fortunately, it's part and parcel of the industry. Yeah, we came onto that. It was an arcade port. The arcade machine ran similar hardware to an N64, 100 megahertz chip with a floating point unit on it. PS1 was a 30 megahertz RISC processor with no floating point. They tried to directly port all the code. It took them about 4 months before they actually got it running. And the first time they got it running, it took a second to render each frame, which to me, coming in from the outside, was pretty obvious. And we come in, they were understaffed. We were working on another game at the time, and they basically stopped development on that game and asked us to help out with Gretzky. There was basically one program on it and a couple of artists, and there was no way it was going to get done. So again, it was a case of, right, we scrapped it and we started again. Sometimes it's the way it has to go. It's not easy. Yeah, we lost a lot of sleep on that one. We did eventually get it out a couple of weeks before Christmas, but yeah, that was pretty hard. Okay, so I think I covered most of that on infrastructure. Oh, sorry, I will skim through my notes. Okay. So a little bit about designing a game. This is the Blessington Carriage pub. That is where most people from core design socialised. And there was lots of Guinness drunk. But yeah, it was, most of Universe was designed in the pub. We were asked by the boss, Jeremy Smith, to do an adventure game. Core Design had just released Curse of Enchantia, which was their first adventure game, which was doing quite well at the time. And so, yeah, Jez said, we want another adventure game. What do you guys want to do? This guy, this is Rolf Moore. This is the artist. I'll talk about how he actually did some of the graphics later. But yeah, he is the main character, Boris, in Universe. And there's a good reason why that is there. You'll see in a minute. But yeah, he already had these ideas for, I guess, a story more than anything. Rolf, as well as doing game design, he does a lot of covers for comics and videos, DVDs, Blu-rays these days, and books as well. So I guess some of the story came from some of that sort of work that he'd been doing. But yeah, he got the story. We just started working on it, really. We iterated it in the pub. I mean, there's 4 of us. There's, 30 people, I think, at that time, core design. I guess about 28 of them went to the pub on a regular basis each week. The boss didn't, and one guy that didn't live in Cambridge. And that was pretty much it. So it was a very close-knit group of people, really fantastic, dynamic, creative environment, and a great place to work. So we just started working on the game, and we iterated it with ideas as we progressed. It's obviously very, very different these days. I mean, when you're doing something like Killzone, and you're working for Sony on a AAA game, you can't just wing it in the pub. And as I mentioned earlier, we've got a number of people in different departments, all of our different artists and designers and everything else. We have specialists for different things. So we've got designers working on the game design. We hired in, contracted in script writers and people to do backstory for it. We even in early days, we contracted in people to do previs as we were gradually ramping up our team size. And we've got to provide a full game design before we actually start working on stuff, because we need to know everything that's going to be in it, and we've got to plan as best we can for the next so many years and how many people we need to actually fulfill the goal of, sorry, I'm trying to remember where I am, fulfill the goal of making that game. So it does take longer. It does have a lot more up front. There's a lot more people involved early on, but it doesn't always actually go to plan. I mean, a lot of what you design is just an idea in your head, and when you actually get it into the game and play it, it might not work out. And we can't be rigid in, we've got a design and we must stick to that design. So there is still an amount of organic development even in modern day game designs. And we use a thing called agile development, or an agile method, to allow us to do that. We also use small iteration times as well. And what that allows us to do is get so far with the game, get it out, let people play test those various things, and then we can iterate through. But it gives us enough structure to be able to manage a large team of like 120 people. So there's still some similarities there as to going back in the day of, making Universe. We iterated that game a hell of a lot. It's just we did a lot of the design ideas in the pub. And it's not to say we don't do that on Mercenary, but we're a much larger team, a much larger company. So we don't actually get the same socialization that you did in a core, because things just fragment in a much bigger group. That's just the dynamics these days. So for actual development process, as I say, on Amiga, we just got on with it, on Universe. For Sony, Sony's much more formal. They have this thing called a green light process. And what that means is you've got to provide certain things, and you've got to get through certain checkpoints before you can move on to the next stage. And this has come over years to stop them effectively burning money on something that might not actually ever get finished or might not be successful. And yeah, it's come along. I mean, there's been a number of big games within Sony that have gone really far and then got canned. And obviously that's a lot of money. And that's not just Sony, that's every single development house on the planet. So what they have now is these green light processors, and if broadly speaking, we have a concept or an idea, which then at some point gets presented to someone higher up, who then gives us a yes or no to actually go a little bit further with it. And then we've got a prototyping stage, which is about your core ideas of what you want to do with the game, and being able to visualize what it is, rather than just seeing some, some drawings or some renders or whatever. It's actual to do with the actual gameplay itself. And if we get through the prototyping stage, we've got pre-production, or what we call a vertical slice. And this is something, I guess, I'll say relatively recently, in the last decade. A vertical slice is effectively a whole level, or everything that you require to make a level of the game, which is a huge amount of work, but it allows you to bring all of those components together and make sure that your idea is actually going to work, and make sure that before you go into the next stage, production, of making all the levels, that you've nailed it as close as you can get. Things still change in production, but the production side is actually making all of the rest of the levels, and there might be some game mechanics that you didn't do in pre-production that come on. And then at the end, there's what we call alpha, beta, and final. And these are set phases. Without alpha, broadly, you are still moderately changing content, but not much. It's usually optimization and a few bits and bobs. Within the beta phase, you should only be bug fixing. Everything else should be locked down, and it allows you to refine things or make less and less changes as you get closer and closer to your actual goal master. Okay. And I'm a little bit lost now on my notes, so apologies for that. I've probably skimmed over quite a few. Okay. So another side of it that's also very, very different these days is communication. On Universe, I was sat this far from everyone else. 4 of us in a room, another 6 guys on the other side of the room designing other games. You needed something, you literally shouted over to Rolf, Stu, or Jim. That was pretty much it. I mean, we had the boss there. He was in the office upstairs. We had Martin doing the audio. He was in his little dungeon in the basement, which we called an audio studio, which was like a dungeon in the basement. And then we got a couple of QA guys. All the marketing was done in-house. The only stuff that went out-house was localization, getting all the text converted into different languages. So yeah, it was a small studio, everything was internal. You needed something, you talked to them there and then. A Mercenary, whole different ballgame. Obviously Sony's a worldwide studio, but we outsource some of the work. So we got some modeling work done in China. We got some of the concepting in the early days outsourced to previs artists. We were struggling to make all the levels, so there's a couple of the multiplayer levels which got outsourced to another team. We've also got a group called the Advanced Technology Group, which is, I'd say it's worldwide in Sony, but actually it's European predominantly, but there's the equivalent of the Advanced Tech Group in America as well. So they're based in London and Cambridge. And then we've got Japan writing the operating system, and America as well, working on those sorts of things. We've got a company called SN Systems, which Sony bought a while back, which make a lot of the software for the compilers and the optimization tools. And then again, localization's done out of house, controlled by Liverpool, and who communicate then with rest of Europe for doing localization. We hired in contractors as script writers, storyboarders. We did some mocap as well in the studio. We're on 2 levels, on 3rd floor and 1st floor, and we changed our 1st floor into a mocap studio. There's some stuntmen, some martial artists come in and throw themselves around. Sounded like fun. And then we've got Guerrilla Amsterdam, who our sister company. They made Killzone over these years. Killzone's their baby. We work very, very closely with them on Mercenary. And then you've got all of QA and marketing worldwide. So 120 people making the game, but actually if you look at the credits on Mercenary, there's over 1,000 people who've had some direct involvement on getting this game out of the door. Obviously a lot of that is infrastructure and marketing and everything else in other countries, but it's a huge amount. Bizarrely, I watched Universe on YouTube to remind myself of, in fact, there's stuff in there I don't even remember writing. And looking at the credits, it's funny, it's like, we didn't even put the boss on the credits. I get fired for that these days. But yeah, so quite different. It's the communication side makes things, in some respects, a lot more complicated, but you can understand sort of why that is with distributing worldwide. So going to the actual games, there's some similarities here, to be honest, because like I say, Universe was the biggest game I'd ever done before that, platformers. Came on like 5 or 6 discs. This is the back of the box, and what we used to call putting on USPs, unique selling points. And you can hardly read it, but it says here about this 500 frames of rotoscoped animation for the main character. And what rotoscoping is Rolf, the incredible artist, videoing himself, and then drawing over the video to make the actual sprites, which is why Boris, the main character, looks like Rolf. But yeah, there are over 500 frames of animation, and most of them are on the main character. There's a few others in there, and we rotoscoped my girlfriend at the time. She's in there, Vanessa. And as well as doing that, the actual sprites themselves are scaled in the game. And that's not part of the animation. And that's all done procedurally on the CPU. So there's 500 frames of full-sized animations, and then we scale it in software. So we were trying to push the machine. We were trying to do something a little bit more than hand-animated stuff in D-Paint.
Is there any reason you store them in full size and then reduce them with the CPU?
Yeah, because
we
didn't have the memory to store them. You run in and out of the screen. There's basically, due to perspective, you're running down a road, you get smaller. So we literally couldn't store them all in memory. Yep, okay. So I've just quickly knocked together a quick movie just of some of the screenshots. Now I've got to apologize for some of this because I grabbed all of this off the internet. I had to scale some of this stuff down and then put it in a movie, and then PowerPoint's compressed it. So it might not look that great. But you'll see the characters various different sizes. The other thing that we did is we wanted to improve the graphic quality. So all of the backgrounds are actually painted by Rolf. They're all airbrushed. And we scan these in on a PC scanner. Now the Amiga, it's got various graphics mode, but in general, most games like this will be done in 32 colors. And we wanted to push that. So what I did was wrote some software that what we could do is we could change 16 of the colors on every single scan line. And then we got 8 colors that were the same throughout the whole game for Boris and other main sprites like the hand and stuff. And then we got 8 other colors that changed on per screen basis for other animated sprites and stuff like that. And it was also in extra half bright mode, so it meant it took those 32 colours and created half-intensity versions of those colours as another set of 32. So yeah, we could get up to 256 colours on a standard Amiga, which no other game did at the time. There's Rolf again. So, you know, it was ways of pushing the machine in, you know, just novel ways to actually get more out of it. And, you know, this is similar to some ways to what we did on Mercenary. So this is a handheld game, like I say, running on batteries. Vita is nowhere near as powerful as PS3. I do not believe the hype. Well, don't tell anyone in Sony I said that. And we wanted to push it. We wanted a PlayStation 3 experience. And a lot of that is the graphical quality experience. And to do that, it's difficult, but we've got the advantages of, we've got the advanced technology team, literally, some of them working in our office. And we work very closely with SN Systems, who do the performance analysis software. So we could actually work out where the bottlenecks were in our game, make improvements, and we could also work out where their software wasn't that great, and they could make improvements, so it made our job easier, or quicker, not necessarily easier. And along with that, Sony, as I mentioned, they modify the silicon on Vita. It's not just off-the-shelf chips. So they put a number of obscure texture formats into the graphics chips, which allowed us to actually use those. And what our rendering guys did were they took the lighting pipeline and they rebuilt it so that they would separate out different bits of data, and we'd store them in different texture formats to get more compression on them without losing quality and be able to push more data through to the hardware. So that's sort of the stuff that we were able to do to help push this game. And as well as that, our advanced tech group used to use our game to analyze their graphics drivers, and they would see where we were pushing the hardware and where they could actually make improvements. So it's like this circular thing within the studio. And the improvements then that ATG made on the drivers went to the whole community worldwide. Every single person working on Vita then got the improvements that we've been able to make in-house. And same with the toolset that SN Systems did. And I'm afraid this is where I'm going to have to ask you to stop recording, Jason. Okay, but it's not quite that easy. I'll explain that a little bit in a minute. I mean, for Universe, we had basically a couple of QA guys permanently on staff at Core Design, and they did other jobs like IT as well. You know, it was multifunctional. And we tested the game ourselves, and our friends who were also making games there tested the game. But that was pretty much it. It was all done internal. Whereas, again, totally different ball game, modern games these days. I mean, not only is it about the testing for bugs, it's about whether the game is too hard, whether it's as playable as you think it is, whether people are actually going to understand some of the things that are in the game. And what we do now is we've got a thing called focus testing. We use focus groups. We've got a room set up in in London, where we can bring the public in, who then play the game, and we video them so that we're not influencing them in any way, and we can see how they're playing the game, and we can see whether or not they actually understand things, or whether they're struggling. We can see if there's areas of the maps that they never go to, or we can find out if there's choke points in the maps where they're always dying and it's too hard. So that's really important, and that's not something we really ever had back in days of Amiga stuff. It was always game developers testing their own games because they love games, which also made them nails hard at times as well. So as well as the focus grouping, we've got a QA department up in Liverpool, and they run 3 different shifts. So they've got QA running 24/7. And then we've got QA out in Japan and America as well. And we work with all of these departments, feeding us bugs that they find, and there's usually a lot of them because you've got a lot of people testing, and the games are so much more complicated these days. You've also got bugs coming from 3 different parts of the world. Sometimes they're the same bugs get replicated, so you've got to try and work your way through the bug database on those.
But tell us a little bit, because you were saying earlier you've got sort of 2 terabyte hard drives each. And so how do these places around the world get the very latest games?
We create a build for them. Basically, it's like what you would get if you would download the game from PlayStation Store. It's just a package, what we call a package file. So that gets sent off over the network to them. They will then install it as if, exactly the same as if you bought Killzone from PS Store. But what advantage we've got over sort of like the Amiga days was when it crashed on Amiga, we would write software that it would bring up a screen and it would show you the registers of the hardware when it crashed. But that was it. That was pretty much all you got. And then you got the tester in the house who could tell you what he did, or hopefully could demonstrate what he did. And then you would have to try, you'd look in your code and try and figure out why that had crashed. Now, because we've got QA in all these different places, it's really hard at times. Quite often what you get is there's one guy in Liverpool who can crash it in a very specific way and no one else can. We do have some guys in-house doing QA. We had a couple of guys shipped down from Liverpool and we hired a few contractors in as well. So there are guys who will help us when I can't get it to crash. But we also have much better technology these days. We have a thing called a core dump, which when the Vita crashes, it will literally save all memory to disk. And they send me the core dump, and I can load it into a debugger, and I can inspect memory, registers, everything else. I can't run it, but I can sort of see where it's come from, and that'll help me. We also have them rigged up with videos, cameras. Well, not video cameras. We take the stream from the screen, and we pipe it out to the PC, so I can see exactly how they were playing before they crashed it, and they'll often do screenshots as well. So even though there might be someone in Japan I've never even spoke to before, they can hopefully get enough information to me to help me. So that is pretty much about the software failure bit, which I was just explaining there.
About the Amiga one.
That is the Amiga one. That is what the operating system would give you, which is not much use. And I don't even remember what that was. It was so long ago. But we would write our own stuff. Basically, on Amiga games, you would override the operating system, and you would write your own exception handler. But you would just get a screen of numbers. Not a hell of a lot of help. Well, it was, but it was limited. So what else we got? So yeah, it's not only about making the games. Back in the day on the Amiga, there wasn't all these events or anywhere near as many. There was ECTS, European Computer Trade Show, and one or two other events. But we didn't have to support anywhere near as much as this sort of stuff. I don't think we even did internal builds, internal milestones. I think literally I copied what was on my Amiga onto another disk, and that was it. Or I'd made a backup the week before. Whereas these days, we've got to have these things constantly in mind, which means that it's not disruptive, but you can't always take what you would consider the ideal development path, because you've got to support putting demos on for other things. So you might have to go around about doing something rather than straight to it, sort of thing. So we're supporting shows. We also support internal demos as well. So even though we might be out at GDC, we might not show to the public stuff at GDC, but we might show stuff to America and Japan, that sort of stuff. And then you've got people like Mr. Shuhei there, who we have to obviously show things to at times. So it's not all just about day-to-day job of writing code. There's all these different things going on in the background, which we've got to add into our day-to-day job. And then days after the game shipped. So on Universe, I guess the only post-release stuff we did was we made it work on CD32. Now on Killzone, it's been very, very different. Sometimes we have to get first day patches out to rectify those bugs, which isn't ideal, but sometimes that's just the way it goes. There's also things that happen that we're not aware of, and even if we'd done the best we possibly could, we might never have found them. And one of those things on Mercenary was there's some very specific problems with Wi-Fi routers and people having problems with networks. And we narrowed this down to a specific set of hardware and a specific set of firmware running on those routers. And it took us actually quite a long time, but eventually we were able to resolve this and get a patch version out to our customers, which they loved, because then they could play the game properly. And it was only a small number of people that were suffering from that, not everyone. But it does show how, patching is not all evil, us fixing bugs late. And then you get stuff like this, where Laura's one of our environment artists, and with an okay from the bosses at Sony, she was able to post this, because our customers have been asking for Bot Zone to run on our multiplayer maps. And we just didn't have the time to do it, to hit our deadlines. But we spent time afterwards, and we released that, and they were ecstatic. They absolutely loved it. And I think this thing of being in touch with your customers is just a requirement these days. I think it's really advantageous for us. I mean, we actually monitor forums and see what they're talking about on the forums, and they actually talk to us at times asking for things, and we can't always say yes, but there's enough people asking for Bot Zone that it pushed us to go, yeah, we'll support that, we'll do that. And it's good for us in that people are playing our game longer. Word of mouth, they love it, we sell more games. Win-win. But yeah, I think this dialogue with your customers is so important these days. And this just didn't happen back on Universe, because there was no internet then. There was an internet, but we weren't online. There was none of this at all. I think it was close towards time when I left Core, partway through Tomb Raider, that we got online. And even then it was very, very limited. I think, the biggest thing we had, contact we had with our customers was I got some fan mail from a 14-year-old lad saying he loved Universe. That was brilliant. It made me really proud. But it's very, very different these days, which is a good thing, I think. I think it's a very, very positive thing. So just to wrap up, I mean, obviously that's the past. I mean, 20 years ago, releasing Universe, and last year releasing Mercenary, and still this year patching and doing a few new things to Mercenary. So I just thought I'd just pop a few slides on the future, because things are changing. I think it's quite exciting times. I mean, Morpheus has just been announced, and there's obviously the Oculus Rift, and VR is obviously in the headlines at the minute. And I think this is going to be really interesting, because I think it's going to be a game changer on not only how games play, but how we develop games as well. If we can get stuff working correctly, immersively in VR, I think it opens up a hell of a lot of opportunities for us, and I think gamers could love it as well. I don't know if anyone's seen the video on YouTube of a guy on a roller coaster on Oculus Rift. If you want to know how immersive VR is, just watch that. He's all over the place. I'm surprised he didn't throw up. I think that's a good thing. So yeah, that's going to be interesting. That's quite exciting. And along with that, you've got different ways of interacting with games. Now, this is not something that we're working on or whatever, but it's just an example of ways that we can interact. I mean, with the Morpheus, you've got the Move controllers, which give you spatial positioning for where your hands are in VR and stuff like that. But I'm sure things like this will come out, or other weird and wonderful things will be tried out. Some will work, some won't.
Well, they tried the Power Glove, didn't they? Nintendo Power Glove.
Not yet, but it doesn't mean that they might be able to get something like that working. And then you've got this whole interconnectiveness all the time. Sharing your save data across multiple machines, and you wanting to pick up and play, or you wanting to interact. You got things like the sharing side on PS4 where people can watch you playing and all this sort of stuff, or you can boost to YouTube and become famous, all that sort of stuff. I think it's going to be very, very interesting. And then this thing down here, I don't know if people have seen it. There's it's what they call a short throw projector screen. It's a 4K short throw projector screen that Sony are working on. So literally with these, you'd be able to just use any wall as a screen. And again, I think it's opening up more opportunities for us, and well, it'll save you a bit of space for where your 50-odd inch TV should be, or so on and so on. So that's pretty much it. I mean, I'd like to wrap up there and just like to say thank you for everyone coming and everyone supporting this wonderful place. And I'm happy to answer any questions if you've got.